Blessed are the peacemakers. So wrote Donald Trump of his own work in finalizing a ceasefire deal that finally, or at least for now, has put an end to the fighting in Gaza. Addressing Israeli politicians last week, he said it marked the dawn of a new Middle East, and shortly afterwards, addressing a summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, he said it was time to put the old feuds and bitter hatred behind us. But what does this deal really signify? I've been trying to sift through the hyperbole and the characteristically grandiose statements and work out what here actually does suggest a positive, lasting step forward, and what might just be for the moment, and perhaps might just be smoke and mirrors. Because, and listeners will forgive my skepticism, we have been here before. Not merely over Gaza, there was a ceasefire just 9 months ago, but across the broader Middle East. We've had the new dawns and the false starts, and of course we all remember mission accomplished. Most of those proclamations actually displayed an alarming lack of understanding of the nuances of the region and the hopes and desires of those who actually live there. This new deal is framed as a comprehensive peace roadmap, and I think in some ways that is the issue with it. It is simply too big a pitch. That the war on Gaza has finally ended is a moment of enormous celebration. Aid can go into the devastated strip, people can rebuild their lives, the final living Israeli hostages are now home, and Palestinians detained without charge for years are free. But beyond that, the 20-point plan put forward by Trump is light on detail, and there's still a lot left to be read between the lines. When Trump said to the assembled dignitaries at the Sharm el-Sheikh summit that he was opening a new chapter defined by hope, security, and a shared vision, one has to wonder what that vision actually is and how widely it is shared. To pass those details and to consider whether this ceasefire could actually mean the end of the war, I brought New Lines' Middle East editor Kareem Shaheen back onto the podcast. As a reporter and editor, Kareem has brilliant insight into the hopes and fears of those caught up in the war, having edited the words of Israelis and Palestinians throughout this conflict. I'm Faisal Al Yafai. Here's this week's episode of The Lede. Kareem, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and congrats on your latest award, Signal Awards, right?
Thank you. Well, in the wake of the ceasefire deal, it feels like one person is always dominating the headlines and dominating the narrative. And of course, that man is the deal maker in chief, Donald Trump. At the peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, I know you know this, Trump proclaimed himself the only one that matters, and he listened and enjoyed various world leaders showering praise upon him. The most notable, I think, was the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who said, this is a quote, it's not, obviously it's a quote, it says, "History has immortalized his name in golden letters." I wonder, Kareem, is Trump right? Is Shehbaz Sharif right when it comes to pulling off a diplomatic coup like that? Is he the only one who matters?
I think he's the only one who could have pulled it off, frankly, right now. It's an extraordinary moment. Listen, I mean, we don't know any of the details of the peace plan. We don't know actually much about what's going to happen, about how Gaza is going to be governed, about all those, when the Palestinians will actually be able to regain the entirety of the strip and actually be able to rebuild if they do, whether Tony Blair will grace us with his presence in this board of peace, which Trump is apparently heading. We don't know any of those details, but we do know that the killing has stopped. We do
Having
know
devastated one Arab country, he now wants to repair another one.
Right.
He should be on the board of peace for the Iraqis anyway, whatever.
Listen, I mean, if he pulls this off, if this ceasefire holds, and if he manages some sort of similar ceasefire deal in Ukraine and Russia, I think he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sad to say it. But he deserves, unfortunately, even though most people don't want to hear this, but he deserves a lot of credit for how he managed to pull this together.
You're talking about Donald Trump, the same person who's been giving the weapons to the Israelis to devastate Gaza for 2 years. That's the arsonist turned firefighter that you're celebrating.
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, Barack Obama, when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, it's not like America was not giving Israel weapons back in the day.
But he didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize
Well, he
based
got
on
the Nobel
that.
Peace Prize for aspirational reasons. He didn't get the Nobel
well,
Peace
that's
Prize
true.
because he'd done anything.
That's true.
Whereas Donald Trump actually managed to bring a ceasefire to a genocide, a vastly destructive war that had killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. And he did it by pushing for it. He did it through deft diplomatic means, quite frankly. This deal is not very different than the deal that the Biden administration had developed over the course of their inaction and watching from the sidelines during the conflict. They managed to hold on to that deal and do nothing with it because apparently they didn't have any leverage over the Israeli prime minister, despite giving him so many weapons and succor and support throughout the course of the conflict. Donald Trump, the course of events was very fascinating because he proposed this deal. Hamas said, yes, we'll abide by it, but we have some concerns. And he took that as a yes. And then he pushed the Israelis into accepting it. Of course, he had discussed the details of the deal with Netanyahu before it became public in the first place. But crucially, he made Netanyahu stick to it and say yes, because Netanyahu needs him desperately in order to continue to hold on to power and in order to continue to fight his various wars and bomb a random Arab country every couple of weeks.
This is something that you and I often argue about, and I think sometimes maybe listeners think that I'm the realist, but actually I think on these topics you are very much the realist. I mean, you would accept that the leverage that Biden had over the Israelis is basically the same leverage that Trump has, but Trump was willing to use that leverage to secure almost an identical deal.
To a certain extent, I mean, Trump right now is a very popular Republican president, right? He's got all of this incredible cachet somehow. He's supposed to be a lame duck president. He's only, I mean, he's there for another 3 years. God, it's only been 8 months that he's been in power, which is insane.
Yeah, 6 wars, 8 months. Yeah,
actually 9 months. He's ended 8 wars. He said 8 wars, but and he ended. He was instrumental in resolving some. I don't know if he resolved them in the sense of there's a lasting peace deal now, but nothing is perfect in this world. I don't know if he's got the wherewithal or the attention span, quite frankly, to negotiate a Good Friday agreement, for example. But he's let's ceasefires in India and Pakistan. Do you remember when the conflict was flaring up between India and Pakistan and everyone was worried about nuclear weapons and things like that? Armenia and Azerbaijan, this is actually the best part of all of this. It's not even his declaration that this is the dawning of a new Middle East. We don't even know the details of the ceasefire in order to contemplate the idea that the Middle East has suddenly been transformed by his presence. But it's just the way he talked about every prime minister and every president who was there.
Yeah,
it lifts the facade all of a sudden of how much they all suck up to the United States of America, how much they all suck up to Donald Trump, and how much power he actually holds over them. And that, by the way, America has been unwilling to exercise this power for the longest time.
And this is absolutely worth saying, because I think this is something hugely interesting. This is what I meant about Biden having essentially the same amount of power but being unwilling to exercise it. Because when you see him on the stage, he has all these global leaders, and you're not talking about small countries, apologies, Azerbaijan and Armenia, but you're talking about important, powerful, rich countries, the UK, France, big countries, Indonesia, third largest country in the world, Turkey, all these places. And yet, as you say, it's him and everybody else is behind him, and he's just going one at a time saying, oh, no, I love this guy so much. He's so tough. There's no crime in Egypt, apparently. You and I have both spent time in Egypt. I think we know that isn't the case. And I think
it wasn't just that. My favorite part was Macron. He's like, Macron, you're taking the low-key approach this time, Emmanuel.
So I was about to bring that up. So Macron was the only, Western leader not on the stage. And I think I was actually going to go and look today in the French press to see why he didn't go on the stage. But I imagine it was an optics thing. He didn't want to look like just like a sideline to Trump. Surely that must be the reason,
Quite possibly. Trump alluded to this when he said, oh, you're taking the low-key approach. It's
he was
how surprising that was. But it's the way he talks to these leaders, and there's something very real about it and very authentic. And we were having this conversation yesterday about Zohran Mamdani and about how he's, we're discussing writing about him and the authenticity factor and how and how he's real. He's kind of someone who's actually following through on a lot of his promises and what he's planning on doing. Seems to genuinely believe it. And Trump is like that, for better or worse, in a lot of these situations. There was a hot mic moment with I think the prime minister or the president of Indonesia.
President of Indonesia, yeah.
Where he's telling him about meeting Eric Trump and Don Jr.
Yeah.
There was another hot mic moment with the Canadian prime minister where he says, "Thank you for upgrading me to president," because he called him the president of Canada.
Right. And what do you remember what Trump said?
Well, he slaps on his back and he says, "Oh, did I say that?" And then he says, "Oh, but at least I didn't say governor."
Exactly. But this is, and I know for the audience, I know sometimes they get correctly upset when we kind of joke too much about Trump, given the devastation that he's caused at home and abroad. But there is a kind of comedy aspect to Trump, which is that he really did say that line about governor, which is a pretty funny line. Like it's a
very fun. And listen, I'm Canadian, and I think that I'm Canadian now. I'm Egyptian Canadian. But I don't. It's not that I find those moments very funny. It's that I find them very illuminating. That there are personalities behind these ornate stages and power stages, and the reason that we can get a better insight into that under Trump is because he's a shameless grifter. It's the reason that we get to see a lot of these things. It's because he's a shameless grifter, and it's because he's happy to market himself this way. He's happy to be the showman who introduces everyone, who knows everyone, who slaps them on the back and who talks about it. Now, this is obviously when you talk about the Nobel Peace Prize, it's fascinating that you've got a president who is so keen for this sort of recognition that he has all these presidents and prime ministers lined up to call him a man of peace, to call him a generational peace talent, right?
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, he's sending troops to American cities, to govern them, and particularly democratic cities, to force them into submission. And it's just a fascinating turn of events, but it's also a fascinating insight into all these leaders.
What do you take from it as a watcher? You know, you're Canadian now, you're watching across the border at the greatest nation on earth. And of course, you've spent a lot of time in Arab countries, and you've seen some of the political theater that lies behind Arab politics. How much do you see of that political theater in what is happening, here or there in the US?
Well, in a very substantive sense, it is political theater, because we don't know how this deal is going to actually pan out. We don't know what the contours of it are. I don't think we've actually seen seen many details about this port of peace and about any of this stuff. And obviously, it's primarily theatrical in the sense that he said that this is a dawn of a new age. It's the defeat of these anti-civilizational forces. It's we're going to transform the country. We're going to transform the region. Israel is. I hope everyone joins the Abraham Accords. Right? He was talking about how to pronounce the Abraham Accords, but he doesn't like the way he says it. It was very odd, but it's in keeping in line with his speech at the Knesset, right? When he talked about Miriam Edelson giving him a lot of money that helped convince him to move the embassy
right.
to
So this goes to your point about that sometimes Trump exposes the reality behind the curtain, right? He pulls back and he shows that this is
I don't think he accidentally does it. I think he does it on purpose. And I think that this is a big part of why people love him for it and enjoy him for it. It's like having that awkward uncle who's a bit racist, at the dinner table on Thanksgiving, like that sort of meme or cliche. Except this particular uncle just actually kind of gets it right sometimes, and by exposing these backroom dealings and things that happen in the background of these international meetings, and we do get a fascinating insight into them because Trump is so unfiltered, and I don't know if it's a deliberate thing or if it's just the way he is and his showmanship and his desire to claim credit for everything. He does deserve some credit. In fact, significant amount of credit for kind of headbutting this deal into existence, but yeah, I think it's a big part of what is so compelling about him is these glimpses into the reality of things and behind the facade.
What do you think is going to happen now with the deal? I mean, are you confident that something will happen? There will be a long-term peace?
I don't know. It's really tough not to crack. I think the most important thing right now for Palestinians is that they're not getting killed on a constant basis and in the most brutal and inhumane way possible. And that's something to be celebrated. And it's time to listen. Right now, it's time to not listen to people like me who are commentating about this from afar But to listen to them, and we have a piece coming out soon, I think it came out today, in which one of our Palestinian writers in Gaza writes about what it's like to receive the news of the ceasefire and what it's like to contemplate the life that's ahead of them now. And they don't know anything about how much of Gaza will be accessible to them when they'll be able to go back to their homes. A lot of the deal actually precludes them from going back to some of their homes and rebuilding them because some areas are off limits to them. But that's the moment to listen to them and to try and understand what it is they want out of this and how they think they ought to be governed. And obviously, whether they become part of some Palestinian state or entity. Yeah, but the it's an unalloyed good. It's a fantastic thing that this war has stopped. This has been so awful. It's obviously an unalloyed good as well that the hostages are back home with their families. I sincerely hope it holds. I don't see how a deal holds ultimately, given that all Netanyahu is interested in is retaining power so he doesn't get prosecuted for corruption, and he's willing to go to such great lengths to bomb so many different countries, to start a war with Iran, to start a war with Hezbollah, to bomb Qatar of all places, and to still maintain his hold on power. And that's why he didn't go to the peace summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, because he didn't want to lose leverage with his allies on the far right who want him to continue bombing Palestinians and erasing them from existence. So it's an open question whether this holds. I hope Trump continues to use the bully pulpit that he has and the leverage that he has over Netanyahu to ensure that this peace deal holds and that it's the start of something bigger than what it seems to be right now. But it's fantastic that it's over, for now at least.
I'm profoundly skeptical. I'm hoping to call this podcast Peace in Our Time as a reference to the Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister in 1938, who made a deal with Hitler and came back to the UK and say, I'm happy to bring you all peace in our time, became a very famous line because, of course, a year after that, the most devastating war of the 20th century started. I tend to think that this is exactly what is happening now. This idea that there is a peace deal is it's ridiculous. There is no peace deal, I think, because, I mean, we've been here before. We know we went through a ceasefire. It's only 9 months since the last ceasefire. But I think the broader point, which we would discuss with Rashid Khaldi on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, is that the structure of the peace deal makes peace impossible. The idea of how Palestine is conceived of, how the securitization of Gaza is considered, that means that any peace deal, whether it lasts a week, a month, even a year, will eventually break down. I expect this to break down very, very shortly. I think they'll be back fighting very, very shortly.
I mean, I think that you're right that this deal creates. It's very similar to. I don't think of it as Neville Chamberlain. At least he had a little bit of gravitas, but I think of it more like the Versailles Treaty, where you're creating the sort of the environment that's inevitably going to perpetuate the oppression of Palestinians, and it doesn't actually solve any of the underlying causes of why a war broke out in the first place. But I am a bit more optimistic in terms of the timeline because it's been so exhausting. It's been so exhausting. And obviously more exhausting for the people involved in the conflict who are getting bombed. But it's also been exhausting for the rest of the world in a real sense. I think that one key difference is that Israel's reputation is not going to be mended by this peace deal. I don't think that all of a sudden people are going to be like, oh, Netanyahu, yeah, he's the man who signed on to the peace of our time. He's not going to be Menachem Begin, shaking Sadat's hands at Camp David and signing a peace deal with the enemy. He's obviously been forced into this. He's obviously been forced into it because he lost whatever leverage he had with Trump, and Trump just wanted this deal to happen, and Netanyahu needs him. But I do think that Israel's reputation on the international stage does not survive, does not get better simply because this deal happened. And so I don't think that there is tolerance for a resumption of this. Now, obviously, day-to-day oppression against Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, you're going to continue to see a ton of that. The Israeli military and the Israeli police forces are going to continue exacting revenge against Palestinians. I imagine settlers will not be will not take a backseat to all of that. There'll be the shadow forces that are kind of carrying out the will of the ruling extremist Jewish ISIS coalition that is in power right now in Israel. But I don't think that the timeline, given the devastation that happened, and given the absence of any forces on the Palestinian side as well that can actually do anything about the oppression of the Palestinians, there isn't anyone to run the two strips of territory that the Palestinians have some presumptive authority over. But I don't think I don't think it's as imminent as you say, but I do think it does lay the seeds for the next conflict, because unless this board of peace that's going to manage Gaza is something real, that there is some kind of vision within it. But it doesn't solve any of the inherent questions, obviously, of whether the Palestinians get a state, what shape that state looks like, how you actually rebuild the country, how you give Palestinians rights under Israeli protectorate status, or however they envision it. It doesn't liberate the Palestinians, frankly. And so this deal, it's obviously not as wide-ranging as Trump and his bullshit aura farming that he does at these sorts of conferences. It's not that,
right?
But it's not nothing either, I think.
Okay. What do you think? I wanted to ask you this about liberal politics, because I know you have a complicated relationship with liberal politics. I think we can say that. But what do you make of the fact that it wasn't liberals who solved this? It wasn't the Biden administration. It wasn't the liberals of the world, of the Western world, who solved it. It was the Republican right, and one person in particular. What do you take from that?
Yeah, I don't think it's the Republican right. I think it's just him on an individual level. But it is instructive to. I was listening yesterday to the podcast, the Pod Save America guys. I really enjoy listening to them, even though I don't necessarily agree with some of their takes. But one of them was saying that it's insane that why doesn't Biden have that kind of leverage over Netanyahu? Why is it a Republican president that has the capacity and the wherewithal to force a deal like this through? Why can't Biden do the same thing? And he was saying that obviously it's quite likely that Biden had the same leverage over Netanyahu as Trump did. He was just not willing to use it. Yes, and the question of why he's not willing to use it.
And what is your interpretation of that?
I mean, I mean it more broadly. Look, the thing that I think people don't say enough in respected news analysis of this conflict is that people don't give a damn about Arab lives, and they don't think Arab lives matter as much as other lives. And I think that's just a straightforward conclusion that needs to be applied when there's no other logical reason why something is happening. Trump has these actual human moments when it came to the Gaza conflict. Occasionally, someone would ask him about, have you seen pictures of starving children? And he says, yeah, it's fucking awful. It's a terrible thing that this is continuing to happen, and it needs to stop. Obviously, he would then, at a political level, he would give backup or cover for Benjamin Netanyahu for various things. But sometimes these moments of humanity, they kind of slip through. And he says the thing because the thing's on his mind and doesn't have that filter to stop it. Biden just did not have those moments. He would have those, his spokesperson, what's his name, John Kirby or whatever, who would talk about having these tears in his eyes every time he saw the destruction in Ukraine or maternity ward getting destroyed in Ukraine. But he wouldn't be able to spare those same human emotions in reference to Palestinians. And I think that it boils down to, maybe part of the political calculation is that Donald Trump is extremely popular still, and he's got this mandate, or he's forced everyone to think he's extremely popular. But he just does things, right? He doesn't care about these political limits and the limitations that are placed on him. Obviously, there's also a wing in the Republican Party that's very much against supporting Israel unconditionally, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, including even Charlie Kirk before he was killed, Tucker Carlson, others. So there is that wing within the MAGA movement that is demanding an end to this relationship in the same way that the Democrats have this left-wing part that pro-Palestine. But I think ultimately it's just because Arab lives just didn't matter as much to Joe Biden and the people in charge at the time. And I think that that's why it happened that way.
You know, we had this piece by Zahir Sahlul, who's a doctor in the United States, and he went into Gaza, and he wrote in the piece that when he left Gaza, he went to meet Biden, and he told Biden about what he'd experienced. He showed him pictures of children who'd been killed and Israeli airstrikes, and he said that the first thing that Biden said was about Hamas's atrocities on October 7th. That was the first reaction that he had to being shown images of dead Palestinian children. And you wonder to yourself, on a human level, just on a human level, can you not look at those dead Palestinian children and think to yourself, you know what, I think that's wrong. And I think I can say that that's wrong, and then go on to say other things.
Look, I mean, we see all of this stuff ourselves just by glancing on social media for 5 minutes. We're pretty well informed as to the extent of the atrocities that were being committed against the Palestinians. I don't mean the particulars of each case, but I mean the imagery, the just the pure shock value of those photographs and of those videos. And I'm sure Biden has seen it. I'm sure he's gone through all of that stuff and he's seen it and he's been briefed about it and informed about it by all those extremely powerful American signals intelligence spy networks and agencies and whatnot. And he knows exactly what happened. He knew exactly what happened. And probably the war started before he started to lose his mind too. But I think he knew everything that was going on. And so you could sit and parse politically why he did this or why he didn't do that. And it's quite probable that he lost a lot of votes in some states because of his stance on the Gaza war. Not just by Arabs and Arab Americans, but by anyone with decency. But the thing is that I don't think he cared. And I think it just boils down to he thought that Israeli lives mattered more than Arab lives, and he just didn't give a shit.
Yeah. Earlier this year, we had the writer Omar Lakad on the podcast, and he told me, my sense is that we're watching the last days of a particularly ineffectual kind of centrism that can no longer function as even a performative kind of resistance to the outright fascism that is slowly taking over so many of the most powerful nations and institutions on earth. Is that, remember we were talking about liberalisms in your complicated relationship with liberals, is that liberalism's problem? Not that it doesn't have the answers, but it's just becoming irrelevant.
It is completely irrelevant. I completely agree with Omar, and I'm a huge fan of him and his book, and I can't believe you still haven't introduced us. I'm still upset about that.
I didn't realize. I was like, was I meant to do something?
No, you were not. I'm just a huge fan of his from afar. I don't want to stalk him.
It's a fascinating book.
It's very much true. It's very much true. And I think that this kind of conference exposes that sort of thing, the rhetoric of all of these states that decided, oh, we're going to recognize the Palestinian state, right? This is the least we can do is recognize the Palestinian state, while they were continuing to, in service of centrism, in service of appearing like they're not anti-Semitic, were these countries that pride themselves on having free speech were imprisoning people for saying free Palestine, including Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, holding up
in Germany.
placards. People were being arrested in Britain for holding up placards, not even saying anything. But yeah,
exactly. And so these countries, in service of this pie in the sky place where they're going to have centrist voters and they're going to have Jewish voters and they're going to have Muslim voters and they're going to have everyone is going to support them so that they don't have to hew to the far right or to the far left or whatever. They pursue these nonsensical policies that are so completely against the common sense that their own citizens are telling them is not the way forward and is not what we want. And so they continue to pursue these. But the funny thing is, I was looking at the leaders who were standing behind Trump or lined up behind him, and all of them were just featureless, characterless, lacking any sort of vision or statecraft. It was funny when he called on Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer thought he was going to talk, and then he just sort of shoot him off.
No, but this really goes to your point, because I don't know if you heard what Keir Starmer said, because Trump looked around and said, "Where is Keir Starmer? Where's the British Prime Minister?" Do you remember what Keir said?
No, go ahead.
So Keir says to him, "Oh, I'm something like I'm right where I should be, or right where we normally are, right behind you." When you hear him say that, you think, oh, just shut up. You don't represent us. Like, it's just terrible. Why do you have to behave like that? At least Macron tried to be an independent leader.
Well, that's the thing. Macron's trying to do this. He's the epitome of the centrist thing, right? He actually founded a party that's supposed to be about all of this, and of course they can't govern at all because they can't form any sort of lasting alliance with either of the parties with either of the blocs that participated in the last French election, and so they're chewing through prime ministers like you chew through socks. But I think that Keir Starmer moment is such a fantastic example of where centrism is right now. The only one that seemed to have any kind of character or strength standing behind Trump was, frankly, Giorgia Meloni, who just seemed to have this stoic face throughout all of it, even as he called her beautiful and tried to flirt with her. And she always has these meme-worthy faces in response to Macron shaking hands with her or holding her hand, or one of the European leaders saying something to her. She always has these weird meme-worthy faces. And the other person who came across really strongly was Erdogan.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
he praised him very strongly for always being there and for always allowing Trump to resolve issues and tensions that Turkey has with NATO. Meanwhile, these centrist, characterless, colorless leaders are not the ones who it wasn't actually recognizing a Palestinian state that led to ceasefire. It was Trump bullying Netanyahu because he had the leverage and he had the political clout, and because he had this greater than life personality that somehow in his second term in office, he is managing to push through everything he ever wanted to do.
What do you interpret from the fact that there were barely any Arabs at the table, and there certainly won't be any Palestinians in this peace plan deal? What do you think about the region more generally in terms of taking control of its own destiny, in terms of agency?
Well, I don't think that's super fair. I think that the Egyptians had the role to play, the Qataris had the role to play, the Turks obviously had the role to play in bringing Hamas to the negotiating table. I think they did exert a certain amount of leverage on them. But I do think that we're not looking at it holistically enough. I think it's actually the relationships the Arabs had with Trump and the fact that they're able to navigate him and his proclivities in such a way that is openly corrupt at times. I wrote today about the Saudi deal to buy the video game publisher Electronic Arts, which is a deal that they reached. Their partner in it is Jared Kushner.
Yeah, right.
Who was at the summit in Israel, who was at the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, who was present in all of these events. They know how to do business with Trump, and I think that I don't think it's them taking advantage of him so much as it is them just dealing with him in the way they know how.
No, that's right. Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship they have with him. But
it is absolutely. It's not to the detriment of one side or the other. I do think that they figured out how to deal with him in a way that they didn't understand how to deal with Democratic presidents to a certain extent.
I think that's true. I mean, I don't like that you framed me as the critic of the Arab world, but regardless of that, I
don't think you're a critic. I think it's absolutely correct to see that this deal was really pushed through because of the force of power of one personality, and that is Donald Trump. All of the Arabs have been putting pressure on Hamas to accept various Israeli terms for a long time, and they brought them back to the negotiating table multiple times. And it was Trump who got them to say yes. And then when they said yes, but he said, "Oh, you said yes. Okay, we're going ahead with this." But I do think that the Arab countries did have a role to play, and that's primarily because of the relationship they seem to enjoy with Donald Trump. That is, like you said, I think you put it perfectly, it's symbiotic. And they both coexist within it quite comfortably in a way that they were not able to coexist with a Democratic administration, because the Democrats just lack an imagination. They don't know how to solve these issues.
I wanted us to talk a bit about the next steps, perhaps what it's going to look like in the future. I know you used to work on the Hariri Tribunal. You have an interest in international justice. Do you think that we should start there, I guess? Do you think that the international courts are going to have any role in finding some sort of justice for what happened in Gaza? Or do you think that this deal or any subsequent deal just draws a line under it?
So I've gone back and forth on a lot of this. I think that the ICC did something really important, which is that they proved that they can go after leaders of powerful countries that normally were not subject to the rules of the ICC, either because they were not signatories or because they were protected by the power of veto by one of the superpowers, whether it was Russia or the United States. The ICC is kind of under a cloud right now because of the allegations against Kareem Khan, the prosecutor. And I think that between that and the peace deal happening, I think there's not going to be much incentive to cooperate right now with the ICC on these various issues. Obviously, it can still go ahead with its prosecutions regardless, because it's already gathered enough evidence, at least enough evidence to convince the pre-trial judges at the ICC to issue indictments against Netanyahu and Gallant, the former defense minister, as well as the Hamas officials, some of whom have been killed, I think, in the course of the war. But I do think that it's probably going to put a dampener on any potential cooperation between those sides in the ICC, especially with allegations against Khan.
Well, what do you think that means then for the I guess the so-called rules-based international order?
There's not one. There's not such a thing. I don't think there is a rules-based international order. I do think that indictments by the ICC have some sort of symbolic and moral power, and at the very least they complicate various things like attending conferences or going to these gatherings of world leaders.
But you've come a little way towards my view on that you've kind of moved away from the idea that there is a possibility of a rules-based international order towards the idea.
Yeah, I don't think the 2 years of Gaza show any of that, because ultimately, who is going to be held to account for all the hospitals that have been bombed, for all the civilians that have been killed, for all the children that have been maimed, for all the people who have been starved? And by the way, this also happened during the war in Syria. There were these sieges that were going on, the starvation sieges prosecuted by the Syrian regime and by Hezbollah and by Iranian militias and things like that. There were chemical weapons used. There were over 700 hospital bombings over the course of the war, and these all pretended the violence that took place in Gaza in very similar ways, and in fact similar in scale too. And nobody's going to be held to account for it. It's a ceasefire that stops the killing. But none of these people who said the Palestinians are human animals, or who said that we need to erase the Palestinians, or we need to destroy Gaza completely, or we need, any of this language that signified that they intended to commit a genocide and they went ahead and did it. Nobody's going to be held to account for that.
I've asked a few people on the podcast this question. I think we should end by asking you, do you think that this framing that some people, including I think Omar Al-Akkad and Pankaj Mishra, have, that there is that Gaza represents a schism in the moral order, and that when you think of like the moral order of the world, there is a before Gaza and an after Gaza?
My one issue and contention with that framing is that I don't think that moral order existed to begin with. I think it was dressed up in this ornate, feel-good thing that the West used as a cudgel to claim that it was better than everyone else, and that it did have some. I recently read a book called King of Kings about the Iranian Revolution, and it talked about how the Shah was a little bit worried when Jimmy Carter came to power about the special relationship that Iran and the United States had, and he was worried because Jimmy Carter was talking about making human rights a key component of American foreign policy abroad. And then the first time he met Jimmy Carter was like, "We love you, carry on as you wish." It didn't really matter that the Savak, the secret police, was torturing and imprisoning people and detaining them and things like that, to a smaller scale than Arab countries and Middle Eastern countries do today. But I do think that this international order was just simply a lie. That this moral rules-based order was a lie that the West told itself to pretend like it was better than the rest of the world, and that it should tell the rest of the world how to behave and how to act on the international stage. And I do think that Gaza just removed and eliminated that curtain, lifted that curtain from the reality behind it.
Kareem Shaheen, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to The Lead from New Lines Magazine. This week's episode was produced by Finbar Anderson and hosted by me, Faisal Al Yafai. For more like this, subscribe to The Lead on your favorite podcast app or visit our website, newlinesmag.com.